Uh, Thanks everybody for coming in this evening for our fifth session, which is it's still part of phase 4, but part 2 of phase 4. I think a lot of you are all familiar with how we begin, but I just want to go through a few things to get started. Our goal here is to support maple producers and growing customer base and reinforcing brand identity. We want to build financial and operational sustainability through these practices. And we also want to make sure that we're including new people, new maple enterprises, as well as established operations. I'm sure you're familiar with all of our 5 phases, but we are here in ensure sustainability. And last week we looked at a few things as far as revenue streams. Today we're going to focus on really that revenue side of things. So yeah, we recommend that you use this planner to follow the phases chronologically, at least as you're getting ready to, or as you're starting. But we really recommend that you anticipate going back and looking at this and critically looking at all these phases separately as you're integrating it into your real life operations. So yeah, to review, we've gone through phase 1, which was the design phase. Phase 2 was focusing on getting discovered. Phase 3 was building relationships. And phase 4, we're in ensuring sustainability. As I mentioned last week, this phase is all about choosing revenue sources and then maximizing profitability. I underline maximizing profitability because we're going to give that special attention today. So pricing strategies, just jumping straight into things as far as pricing strategies. And I'll first kind of give a caveat. I'm sure we'll have some decent discussions around this. Everybody has their own pricing strategies. Some people think of it one way, some people think of it another way. We'll talk about a few here today. But the core question is, how do we stay financially viable? And so what we want to do, considering all of this, is we want to think broadly about financial and institutional sustainability. We want our major goal is for long-term health. And how do we achieve that? We need to generate revenue and we need to sustain our operations. So our strategy, what we're focusing on here, is building strategy that creates a balance between vision and numbers. We started working with a bit of numbers last week when we were rating our revenue streams and on feasibility, impact scores, and such. Well, today we're going to work with a lot more with numbers because we're going to be starting to talk about pricing schemes. So as we've done prior, we've gone through some exercises. So today we're going to actually have 2 different exercises. And I encourage you to take some time to go over what I'm presenting, and we'll have a little space to go over things here. So our first exercise is calculating a cost plus pricing scheme. The objective of this pricing scheme of this exercise is to help you determine the selling price for your products or services by adding a fixed percentage or amount to the total cost of production of your product. So there are 3 steps that we're going to do here. We're going to calculate our total cost. We're going to determine what our markup should be for this product, and I'll give you some visual support for this, and then we'll calculate a selling price. So step 1, what we want to do is identify all the associated costs with producing a product or service. So there's 2 major areas that we'll focus on here, and this is specifically for pricing scenarios. A lot of people talk like there are a lot of costs and expenses in accounting for a business, but what we're just focusing on here is specifically getting started with our pricing to take a good look at our pricing. So we'll use direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs include all such costs that are involved in producing the product. So materials, labor, manufacturing expenses are examples. We can talk about more as well, but it's basically what goes into producing this product. And then indirect costs are allocations of portions of indirect costs. Sorry, indirect costs, what we are basically overhead like utilities, rent, and administrative expenses. What we try to do here is we try to allocate some of those expenses to a product. I know a lot of people that do that get creative on this, but normally these indirect costs, usually I like to keep them to like utilities, a portion of the utilities, a portion of the rent, a portion of administrative expenses. So step two here is we want to decide on the percentage or amount to add to the total cost to achieve a desired profit margin. I highly encourage you to play with these numbers. I mean, almost all of these numbers, just really be honest with yourself, not only about designation of direct and indirect costs, but what is that markup going to be? So we're going to go over the basics here, and then we'll talk about, some manipulations a little bit later. So in this phase, you want to remember your audiences. What are the products what are the products that you're selling? What are the services you're selling? What are the quantities of these units that you're selling? And we're gonna, like I mentioned, we're gonna come back to this a little later. And then ultimately, you're calculating the selling price. The following formula is simply your total cost plus your markup. So an example of this, what it would be is if the total cost of to produce a product is $50 and the markup is 20%, the selling price would be 50 plus 50 times 20%, which would equal 60. So I know we're doing some math here. I would just encourage you to do a little bit of quick math. I would encourage you just to write down some notes right now, but this video is meant for you to come back to when I send you a recording, or, to use your workbook and actually, fiddle around with these numbers, because nobody's going to be able to figure out their exact pricing scheme in the moments that we have together tonight. But a visual idea of what this would look like, what I like to do is I create a matrix and I put my products, product descriptions on the side, and then right there I just allocate direct costs, indirect costs, figure out my total cost, and then figure out what I'm going to do for a markup. So that's what it'll look like. I'll kind of bounce between these screens, but I'll leave it up to you all. So what I would like you to do is just get some ideas now. Maybe if you have time, write it all down if you'd like, but I would highly encourage you to come back to this. But try to determine the selling price for your top 3 revenue streams using this cost plus scheme. I understand that a lot of you already have products that you're selling, so this is also an opportunity to just scrutinize your products that you're selling already by allocating direct costs, indirect costs, and creating a total cost scenario, and then creating a markup percentage, and then determining a selling price. So something like, in your workbook could look like this. And what I'm going to do is just give you about 5 minutes here to check everything out. I'll peek back in around 7:19. Go through the scenario if you'd like, or write yourself reminders for when you're personally like taking some time to scrutinize this on your own. So go ahead and take some time, and I'm gonna kind of bounce in between these last 3 slides over the time that we're taking some time on our own. So I'll see you at 7:20. Let's say. Okay, welcome back. Um, so yeah, I just want to reiterate. You can also, I would definitely like, help encourage people to look at their current pricing schemes and analyze your cost allocations and margins uh, that you are currently working with. It's always good to get in there and compare that, to see how you're doing. Just a little more like talk about this is basically like when you get a good idea of what your direct and indirect costs are, like, and then you feel good about allocating them to a product, you're basically like creating this like floor of like, okay, I can cover all this like with all of what I'm doing. And then you understand like how to move forward, like how much you want to be making to cover um, all of the rest of the expenses that are involved, including paying oneself. So as an owner. So did anybody have any questions in regards to this scenario that this exercise that we just went over? Yeah, Meg, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question. I've been trying to figure out how to incorporate overhead into each item size, and it seems like it's so complicated, at least in my case, because I'm not just bottling one size item at a time. It's like all of them. And so I've been having a hard time trying to figure out how to incorporate overhead costs into my cost of goods in a simple way.
Yeah, I would, I mean, I can tell you from a few scenarios that I have that the I kind of like when someone they allocate overhead costs based on the product's percentage of gross sales.
Hmm.
Mark, you can chime in if you've heard any like other ideas, but if you're able to basically go in there, like maybe look at your quarterly, yearly, sales and find out what each product is accounting for based on their gross sales, and that's down to, sizing and everything.
Hmm.
And doing it that way, that's pretty much like I do that a lot, yeah, with clients. If you I think the best way is if you're handy with Excel is just get in there and do it there. But almost with almost all of my with indirect costs, I do that. I allocate it that way. Mark, if you wanted to
Okay.
chime in, or
Yeah, I say that's like yeah, there's like that's great. Like just get all your overhead costs, get a number for that, and then I always encourage people to like work in big increments and just sort of sniff out what makes the most sense. Like you're not going to apply 0% overhead, right? And you're not going to apply 100% overhead. So just work in chunks, like trying to ease the administrative burden of getting everything so precise. So if you've got two products, and is it 50-50, and like Zach said, if you can get your gross revenue percentage and 20% goes through one product line, then it's your total times 20. The other way to do it would be just to estimate how many units like what's your total annual sales in like crop. Like I
Hmm.
sell 3,000 gallons of syrup. And if you know about how much syrup maybe goes through a particular product line, same thing. Get the percentage of the whole and then apply that percentage to your total administrative costs. Um,
and
that's the
ye-
manual way. And then if you have a QuickBooks, an accountant, and you get into like enterprise classing, like that's a great step for your records if you want to go next level. Get someone that can do enterprise classing with your QuickBooks, and you can actually take that overhead in QuickBooks, and you can do allocations through that process. That
mm,
would be on the higher administrative burden side.
Okay. That's helpful. I'll look into that. Yeah, the standard formulas you get on the internet just made it seem like nothing quite fit, but those are some good ideas. Thank you.
And there's plenty of schemes to start with. I mean, to get and then actually get more into. Um, and I would definitely say that like starting with the pricing, is one thing, and that's doing direct cost and indirect cost. But when you're getting into deep enterprise analyses, you're also going to want to be looking at variable costs and fixed costs, which are uh, related but different. What it is it just gives you perspective. I usually like when I'm starting off on like just getting going with pricing, I like to use the direct cost, indirect cost, profit margin model. But if I'm getting into scrutinizing the like doing managerial accounting, I'm going to look into variable costs, fixed costs, and different ways of allocating expenses based on resource consumption. There's yeah with this there's obviously many ways to skin a cat with this.
Thank you.
Did anybody else have any questions? Right. Well, we'll move on to the next exercise here. So in this next exercise, we're going to talk about building pricing strategies that fit your markets. And this is a little bit of what we were just talking about. Is what we want to do is create a pricing plan for that matches different audiences with different or with appropriate pricing. So we're going to put this in. We're going to divide this into two parts here. But in part A, what we want to do is map your target audiences and their willingness to pay. I understand this is completely based on your perspective, but your audiences, your customer profiles pretty well. So I'm going to leave it up to you to figure this out. But what I would like to see you do is list the audiences that you sell to and how price sensitive they are. Um, and add one primary buying trigger for each group. You remember in earlier sessions we talked about what is that impetus that someone's going to have to purchase your product? What is that trigger going to be? Like I said, I mean, like what we've talked about in those exercises prior to this, some examples of audiences are, people that come to your farm stand, people that are members of CSA, tourists, wholesale, which is something that we'll talk about. And so write down these audiences, and then I'll walk you through like the matrix that we've put together here. Um, so the audience, I always put the audience on the left-hand side, and then I put down a buying trigger, which so like say like for example, farm stand locals, what is their major trigger? They want to buy community-based products. That's their thing. That's what they're into. What's their sensitivity to price? That's really up to you, but I don't find too much price sensitivity at local farm stands in Vermont. It's that's my experience. You all know your clientele or prospective clientele. Um, and then just a little helper, like what is your most popular packing size? Like what is your most popular like unit size? Um, and then notes on, and then this is a personal note to yourself. What is the intensity of the service level here? I would definitely say that like a farm stand local, like someone that's from the neighborhood, this is a high intensity like service level. It's high level. We love our local clients. We want to conserve these relationships. The reason why I'm asking you to do this is because you're going to transfer this into your pricing scheme. So take some time. I'd say I'm going to give you another 4 to 5 minutes. We'll come back at 7:34. Okay, welcome back. Um, One thing I will mention, just based on like the sensitivity to price and willingness to pay, we will revisit that after this exercise and have a little discussion about that as well. Um, so the part B, after you've considered all of this stuff with your audience segments, what are their triggers? What is their sensitivity to price slash willingness to pay? Um, what are their preferred pack size? What are their, what is their level of engagement on your service side? These are just all things that are just good to get present in your mind as you move into the next exercise step, which is setting your price architecture. What you want to do here is outline your base price unit for each channel and then apply what I like to call like or modifiers. Modifiers can be something like volume tiers, which is, if someone buys one product or if they buy 10 to 20 products or, even more like at a time. So we'll talk about each of these. We'll talk about influence of market. And we'll talk about like, yeah, there's another thing on, sometimes, people think about grade premiums or discounts on certain products, which is another thing we'll definitely talk about. Discounting is something that a lot of business advisors um, don't encourage to do lightly. So we'll talk about that as well. Um, so more on modifiers, some common modifier types are dependent on volume. Like, so a tiered modifier is, it's giving discounts on people for buying X amount of quantities. For example, 10% off of 12 plus quarts, something like that. That's usually based on, your familiarity with what your supply looks like. In another modifier would be real-time market scenarios. You got to look at your seasonal considerations. That's another situation where your supply and the demand for your product, as well as certain input expenses, will affect what you're paying for, what your expenses are, and also what your revenues could be. So you want to understand your seasonal sales fluctuations. Do you want to change your base prices based on these fluctuations in supply, demand, and also expenses and costs? And then also a grade dependent modifier is if you want to add a premium, if you want to discount something. Uh, those are, all these are highly influenced by demand and also your supply that you have. So get some ideas here. You don't need to really throw down too much information. But I mean, if you already know a little bit about um, what your products are and what you're pricing for them, I did throw in here costs of goods sold. Let's just consider that to be and for this exercise what we did earlier with your total costs. So get an idea of your channels. What is your like base unit that you did in the first part, in part A? What is your most popular base unit? What is that unit's base price? Get an idea of what the costs are going into that, and then understand what is the most applicable modifier to that product. For example, we talked about the modifiers here. Is it a volume dependent modifier? Is it a market real-time dependent modifier? Is it a grade dependent modifier? Is it another thing that you commonly see over the years that you find yourself modifying your product's price? Um, and then one other thing that I mean, I'll kind of just hint on right now is when you're making a product price change to your established clientele, price changes are always understood best when it's accompanied by a reason. So when you're making a price change, don't just go like times are hard. Nobody wants to hear something like that. It just have some very clear messaging, about, so pair the changes, or the price changes with clear messaging, and also don't make wholesale changes on your prices. I understand that there are so many farmers and producers that I work with that are living, pretty much day to day on stuff. And I understand that, sometimes you have to do a wholesale price change. What I mean by wholesale is many products at one time, but try your best to do it one changes at a time, because your clientele, your existing clientele, will be sensitive to those price changes, and they will want to just be able to understand it with you. So, just speaking from experience of what I've gone through with clients in the past, just consider that. Um, so I'll take you back to like, look at this. I'll give you about 4 minutes, and we'll come back at 4:44. All right, 4:44, 7:44. Okay. We're almost there. But so yeah, I also wanted to talk about just, especially with pricing strategies here, is this is a very iterative process, almost like I don't want to say trial and error, but you I think everybody probably, I mean, a lot of people probably have a lot of experience with this, but I do want to reinforce that going through these strategies and other strategies as well is very important to get a really good look at how your sales are going. So it is when you're in the case where you have to start from kind of from nowhere, using a cost plus scenario is the best bet for getting a price established for your product. But there are ways as you get familiar with how your sales are working, how your marketing is influencing your sales, how your operations are influencing your sales, financing, all that stuff, how everything starts building up within your business and affecting your cash flows. You can get into some more in-depth pricing scenarios to make sure that you're influencing some positive change within your business. So while you're going through all of this, it's not just about going through a planning process. It's about getting your eyes on what can lie ahead of you, what needs to change. So um, I'll open up the floor. Does anybody have any other questions on pricing strategies? Um, this is a highly debatable theme, I would say, or um, so feel free to share if you'd like. Any questions you have? Okay, well, I would also say that given the depth and complexity of this topic, you can always reach out to me. I know several of you have reached out to me by email. If you would like to set up a time to discuss your unique scenarios, please feel free to reach out to myself and Mark as well. We're always available to discuss your scenarios. And speaking of Mark, I'm going to bring in Mark to talk a little bit about his experience with willingness to pay and other scenarios related to what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, I'm gonna take a few minutes just to share a little bit more. I mentioned a few weeks back the market research that we're doing. What I'm going to do right now, I'm putting something in the chat. I think Zach explained pricing can happen in a lot of different ways. And as he was talking about the sort of direct cost and the markup for within your business, I put a link in the chat. We have an old fact sheet. It's an oldie from like 2013 on markups and margins. And as Zach referenced, some of these, you hear these terms, but they get used differently. So just to explain, this sheet talks about margins and markups, and this is a little different from just doing your internal pricing. This one's really designed to get people familiar with the idea of selling wholesale, like your first time selling to a local store, and knowing that the store is going to place a margin or a markup on the product that's coming in at the price you sell it to. So if you're not familiar with that process, it's just again the basics of taking sort of a base price and then sort of applying a margin. Applying a markup to a base price or a margin, which is you'll have to look at the sheet. It's a bit of a reverse calculation. But great opportunity if you're going to engage with like a business to business buyer for the first time, having that conversation. What's your margin? What's your markup? I used to sell specialty potatoes, and we we would try to get the target final price for the consumer under $5 for like a 14-ounce bag or 20-ounce bag, but it took understanding what their margins were at the retail store for me to set the price that we agreed to was going to help move product. And both myself and the manager were like, we don't want to get a product that's going to land on the shelf at $5.49. We want to get the product to land at $4.80 or $4.99. And we made some adjustments to volume, and we made some adjustments to packaging as well. I couldn't sell 24 ounces for that price, but I could sell 20. So we shaved off a couple ounces and hit like the 4.99 target. That's not about maple. Sorry. I'm going to share, and I just came from Pennsylvania this past weekend, Lake Erie Maple Expo, and was able to share some stuff, and we had a good conversation. So, taking a second to get set up. There we go. I'm just going to click through. Mention this is the results from the Vermont survey. There's still 3 surveys pending. Ohio, Texas, and California, same or similar questions. So take this as just a nugget for the Vermont consumer results, and then the other stuff's forthcoming. Now I'm going to talk specifically about like what we researched, which was, well, let's see if we can get this to go. Yeah, there we go. We presented people in the survey with a bunch of product bundles, we'll call it, and we basically flipped different features on and off. So we adjusted prices, origin, where it was made, certified organic or not certified organic, climate friendly or not, sustainable forest practices or not. You're like, we haven't heard of those yet. Some of these are kind of like future based. We're trying to understand what consumers may put value on. And then bird friendly practices, as some of you know, there's a pilot program in the Northeast. People are using that as it's not a certification, but like an attribute, a claim, I guess you'd call it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click through a couple slides, and I think the idea is to get us thinking about like what's the willingness to pay. And bear with me, I'm just going to go through a couple of the dynamics. There's container. We asked about plastic or glass. We give me a second to explain. We presented the respondents of the survey with these bundles. They didn't see it like this. What you're seeing is the bottom 3 ranked profiles out of 24. So they ranked 24 bundles, and they saw these one at a time, not with 22, 23, 24. They just saw them. And what they saw was the status of origin, the status of organic, the status of bird friendly, climate friendly, container, plastic or glass, a price, and then that mean rating on the right-hand side, that's their ranking on a scale of 1 to 7. 1 being their least preferred and 7 being their most preferred. So I think I'm going to go through a couple of these. I'm going to show you the bottom 3 profiles, the middle 3, and then the top 3. And using this as an example from the research about how we think about different attributes, and we'll see some responses from consumers. Vermont consumers heavily influenced by origin, None of these bottom 3 and a lot of the lower ones were anything other than Vermont origin. So I hate to break it to you if you're tuning in from another state. You may not want to put Pennsylvania raised on your bottle. Like it's very likely that your syrup would get devalued by Vermont buyers. So these are the bottom 3, right? So we've got origins. You can see there's a mix up of organic and bird friendly and climate. And there's also a mix of lower or higher. We priced our pints in the survey anywhere from, I think 20 was our max, and then we went down to 12 maybe, 12, 14 or 12. We'll see in a second. So this is not just strictly, price bias, but these were the lowest ranking ones. Here's the middle. So remember I said out of 24 profiles. So 11, 12, and 13. And you can see on the far right, the mean ranking on a scale of 1 to 7. These are the ranked 3, 3.2, 3.2. And I'm just going to give you a second here to I'd suggest maybe just scanning from left to right, pick row 11. And you can see, okay, we got a Canadian product. It's organic. It's bird friendly. It's not climate friendly. It's in glass, priced at $18. $18 for a 16-ounce pint. So what we're clearly trying to do is mix up the attributes and then throw different prices in that they don't maybe all make sense logically, but the statistics behind this will sort itself out. I'm not going to give a lesson on statistics. My research partners would have to describe that, but okay, so take a second. You can see we're flipping variables on and off here. So now these are the top 3 profiles, right? Are we surprised? No, I'll get to the next slide. I'll do a couple more some more findings on Vermont consumer preferences, but clearly the Vermont consumers are heavily driven by origins. The top 3, the top 4, they were all Vermont products. Some of them had organic, bird or climate, glass or plastic. But you can just see that mix again, right? The top preference was not the cheapest syrup at all, right? It's actually something in glass, Vermont, organic, climate friendly, in glass, $18. I'd say that's probably on the higher side, right? Again, just take a second, and I'm gonna get to a couple more ratios here. If anyone's got any questions, you're just welcome to unmute, ask them, or hit the chat. I'm just going to do another minute or 2 and then open it up. Okay, so we got these profile rankings, or the preference score, 1 to 7, and we see some low, mediums, and highs. This thing goes through a whole statistical process. We had like over 3,000 respondents, and they had 3,000 people rated 24 products. So you can imagine we actually have like tens of thousands of iterations on product number one, or A, B, C. So I'm just going to skip. There we go. So one of the initial swipes that gets done statistically is looks at all the different mixes of attributes and tries to figure out, of the Vermont consumers, which one, when it moves, actually changes their ratings the most. And what we saw from the Vermont consumers is origin has a 77% relative importance. So 70% of the variation you see in preference or ratings is going to be driven by changing origin. Vermont, other state, or Canada. Huge jump all the way down to get to price, right? We would think there'd be more price sensitivity in shoppers. This survey is finding that price is only 12% of the relative importance, right? So you've got origin driving the equation for shoppers, price, and then, sorry for anyone that's looking to get product valuation enhancement or higher willingness to pay from environmental features, but organic, bird-friendly, climate-friendly, 4% and under relative importance. It doesn't mean you can't find the target market, and I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago. We will probably at some point get heavy into this survey and do some filtering to figure out what percentage or what's the demographic profile of the people that are really finding value in organic. That's one way. I'm actually more interested in getting the California results and just sort of identifying how maybe the presentation to Californian shoppers is possibly different than Vermont. Because we know origin's 70% of relative importance, it kind of tells me, put Vermont on your label, it's going to have a force, an appeal. Question.
Mark, we had a quick question, about
what is
organic.
Organic maple syrup? Yep. So organic's a third-party verification. It's overseen by USDA. It's third-party, meaning it's an audited process. I was certified organic when I was on produce farms. But it's a bona fide process, third party, where producers follow the prescriptions. There's forest management criteria. There's also prohibited or approved substance criteria. I know if some folks are here in organic, defoamer is one of the major issues. Having a certified organic defoamer, and there's been read, right? We had some product available that's no longer available. I wish I had a degree in biochemistry and could work on that one. But so it is I'm just going to stop there. The other ones, the bird-friendly, climate-friendly, we were specific in the research to use the word practices because they're not like, there isn't a general familiarity there aren't necessarily formal verification programs for those practices. But organic's definitely a certified process. And then I'm just going to click through. So willingness to pay, it's a very statistical process. I can't really get into how the reference product goes, but basically from this survey, what we did was we got all the reference statistics back based on people's ratings and what they said is their most preferred and their least preferred. And the statistics go back and forth and it recalculates tens of thousands of iterations to basically say, in comparison to each individual's reference product, how does each attribute on the left influence their willingness to pay? Organic, bird-friendly, climate, container, and so on. If the reference product statistically is $1, it's saying if you were organic to this Vermont consumer base, you could charge $103. If you were bird-friendly, $103. Climate-friendly, $123. Now what got really weird is look at Vermont. If it's Vermont origin, $5. This is where it's a little bit strange. There was such a heavy importance factor for origin that it almost blew up the statistical models. This is not saying you can charge 5 times as much for Vermont syrup. I think it's just really an indication that this origin is super prevalent and has a higher valuation for Vermont consumers than some of these other ones. And then just look at the bottom. Again, no offense, but a reality check. If you're selling syrup from another state into Vermont, the consumers that responded to this survey would actually pay less for your syrup coming from another state. They would pay less for syrup, 41 cents on a dollar for syrup coming from Canada if it was labeled as such. It doesn't mean there aren't shoppers out there. It doesn't mean there's a portion of this a segment of this respondent base that may behave differently, but when you looked at all 3,000 responses, these were the averages. And like I said, we're going to ask the same questions in Ohio, Texas, and California. We want to understand, again, not what you want to sell, but how does the consumer response and the consumer preference inform you about how you want to present your product to those different audiences. I'm going to stop right there. Questions? We got probably not more than a minute or two. And I'll check the chat here. Yeah, there you go. Right, Reed. Organic, bird-friendly environment add up together. Right. And this is a decompositional utility analysis, which looks at each individual one. I like your logic. I just don't want to misspeak statistically. I'm not exactly sure if you can stack them to get to work out, but I think you're thinking the right way, right? It's a package, it's a bundle, right? It's not one or the other. Yeah, great comment. Any more comments? Why do NAS numbers show Vermont syrup selling cheaper than most other states? Yeah, great question. Vermont is super competitive marketplace, and I do know that people are feeling some pressure. If you look at the NAS, I think what you'll often see, if you're looking at the overall price, it's going to be biased by the volume of syrup that sells wholesale or bulk in this state. So if you're looking at the universal average on a per state basis, Vermont and Maine will probably show the lowest price points nationally because of that blending, so to speak. I haven't looked at the all Vermont retail price. I don't exactly know if that's in every annual report. So I kind of want to check. I guess I'll check on that. Maybe hit back the chat if you're actually thinking it's specifically a retail price or if you're thinking it was the all state average. Looks like Michael and Jen. But great question, right? Different regions, different competitive factors, different price points.
I would also say that, I wouldn't base everything strictly on NAS. Just as everything, all of these inputs that you're getting right now are information sources. Just like what you're looking here with like willingness to pay. This is a great, amazing survey, but also if you are in business and you know your environment, who you're working with, that qualitative information, that actual real life information should be just as influential. So I encourage everybody to look at all information sources.
Yep. So this is great. Just going back to Michael, thanks for putting in. So that is the retail bulk price. I don't know. What do you all think about it? What's unique about Vermont? I mean, 55-60% of the nation's crop is happening here in Vermont. So there is a lot of syrup flowing. It could be that some people are selling retail in larger containers. Like, culturally, there are people maybe looking for bargains. So maybe NAS is picking up not just all these specialty glass pints for $18, but maybe there's a large amount of respondents that are still selling gallon. I hope no one's still selling gallons for $45. But I'm sure it's happening somewhere, right? So that could be pulling it down a little bit. I know if I was selling syrup in Connecticut or near like a metro area, I sure wouldn't be selling stuff in gallons, right? I'd probably be going half pints and getting the higher per gallon equivalent. So Michael and Jen, maybe that is driving that as well. The retail prices are getting pulled down just by the function of selling some larger quantities, like larger package sizes. Great question. Yeah, look for this stuff in the trends. And like Zach said, trends are trends on the average, but that doesn't mean when you're in a niche market that you can't find that 5% of the population that's actually wants what you have to offer, but you may have to work to find them. Maybe through analytics, maybe through some of the online kind of stuff that can be done these days to really, if you can, I guess two options, keep doing what you're doing and find the audience that it resonates with, or look at the overall population and maybe shift what you're offering to get a match. Very different approaches, but I don't think either one's better or worse if you can make it work.
Thanks, Mark. And I think we'll wrap it up here. I do have a survey that I'm just going to tell you about right now. We're going to send it in a link to you later on.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, Mark, if you can give just a little plug on what it is.
Yeah, when I stop talking, I'll just pull the link. We are doing a national maple producer survey. The last one was in 2019. We did one. We learned quite a bit about some perception or just kind of what's going on with the business, kind of the business side. We asked a couple forestry questions. So I'd really encourage you to take this survey. It's going to be open for at least another month, month and a half. I'll put this link in the chat. You can check it again when you're on next week. And then please, I'd say encourage your peers in the community to do it. Like, it really helps our programming. And there's some questions, some policy related questions, some initiatives I've been a part of with the International Maple Syrup Institute and the state associations, looking at market development options, using Quebec as a model, not the best model, but understanding that Quebec has a certain mechanism to advance market development. There's some questions on this survey that are asking you producers what your what you're interested is in a couple of different frameworks. So thanks for putting that up, Zach. I know some people have to get off, but I think the chat will probably still be there next week, and Zach, we can kind of get it back in there as well.
Yeah, and please email me too when you if any of you have questions. So yeah, the key takeaways from today: we're creating balance between vision and numbers. We want to calculate cost plus pricing schemes to begin with direct costs, indirect costs, markups, and we want to build strategies that fit our markets, considering willingness to pay and modifiers. Next week, we're going to wrap it all up with planning for action. What we'll do is do a review of everything, but also, from my experience, a lot of people develop plans, but then they come to the point where they're like, "How is this all going to get done?" So we'll talk about